This is BNN Bloomberg 1410, and it's time for The Law Show with Jim Gordon, Vancouver's only law-focused radio show, offering a comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law. Joining us this week, Murphy Batista, LLP, Vancouver Personal Injury Lawyers. Now, here's your host, Jim Gordon.
It is The Law Show, and I am Jim Gordon. We're joined once again by Joe Murphy. He's QC and partner of Murphy Batista. Joe, always great to sit with you. Welcome back.
Thank you, Jim.
Joe, why don't we do what we always do and start out with a bit of information on yourself, your long history, and a bit about the law firm of Murphy and Batista.
Jim, I graduated from law school at UBC in 1975. To explain how long ago that was, fax machines hadn't been invented yet.
Was it teletype then? I'm trying to remember.
It was, it was in the olden days. There were no computers. Things were very, very basic and simple. Joe Batista and I set up the firm Murphy Batista January of 1982. What was memorable about that time is the interest rates were 19%. And businesses everywhere were closing. So we were unusual in that we were opening up a business when everyone else was closing. We started out with 2 lawyers and 2 secretaries, and over time have grown. We're currently about 25 lawyers. We have a support staff of about 75. We have offices in Vancouver, Surrey, Kelowna, and Vernon. The other thing that sets us apart from so many other firms is we've really never done advertising.
You and I talked about that last time, yeah.
In the olden days, the ads were in the yellow pages, and the yellow page lawyers' ads ran for almost 100 pages.
Wow.
Some of them were full-page ads. We weren't in the yellow pages. We don't advertise on television. You don't see us. We have since 1982 adopted a very simple philosophy that if we do a really good job for our clients, the business will come, and it has, as shown by our growth. Murphy Batista does more trial work, I think, than any other law firm in the business. Mm-hmm. We have obtained some of the biggest awards in BC history in a variety of what's called heads of damage. And the great thing about that is if I take a case to trial and do really well, if I get an award for like future income loss that's the highest in the history of BC, that means that all my other clients whose cases are settled probably get a better settlement.
Interesting.
So it benefits the client whose case goes to trial, but it also benefits all the other ones that don't. And in our firm, 1 in 10 cases goes to trial, which is exceptionally high in the business.
You know, you brought up last time, and a lot of people, our listeners may not know this, but we talked about the fact you said you don't advertise on television. I did not know, until you brought this up in our last show, that a lot of the commercials you see where it's, hi, contact your local rep and we'll talk, that a lot of this stuff is fanned out from Toronto. So you've got your offices all in BC. I'm sitting with you here in Vancouver. But you brought that up last time. We're not here to slam other law firms, and they'll go nameless, but you certainly see a lot of commercials on television.
Jim, there's 2 firms, Presler & Company and Diamond & Diamond. 3 or 4 years ago, they didn't exist in BC. They were only in Ontario. Mm-hmm. And both of them have used extensive TV advertising to set up in BC. And the advertising has been, we're here to help you. But they're really Ontario firms with offices in BC. They've spent an incredible amount of money on advertising, TV advertising. And that's something we don't do because that's just simply not our business model. That's not how we get business.
And also that you could be, and listen, your companies are free to be based in Toronto and satellite out here, but also you may not be getting what you think you're getting in terms of representation, correct? If the head office is in Toronto, again, we're not slamming head offices in Toronto. Most of the country is run out of there. But you brought that point up one of our earlier shows about that you really have to do your research.
You have to do the research, and you have to know how to develop a case and how to do all the things involved in a case. And for a firm to move out from Ontario and hire a bunch of relatively inexperienced lawyers isn't going to provide the same quality of service that a client would get if they went to a well-established BC firm. one of which is my firm, and there are others.
Okay. Well, let's move on to your firm, and let's talk a bit about the philosophy. One of the things I like when we sit down and talk is you can certainly dispel a lot of myths about...
I hope so.
No, you do, about personal injury lawyers and injury victims. Let's start with the Murphy Batista philosophy. What not attracts, but when someone comes to you, let's walk through some of the things that you do with this person that comes in. We talked about this last time, where quite often in a vulnerable state.
Oh, they are. Most of the cases that we do are major cases, deaths, serious injuries, brain injury cases, spinal cord injury cases. And when that happens, you have not only a person injured, but you have the entire family in crisis. A standard scenario is an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid from Prince George who's out playing, you know, in the summer, boating and swimming, and they end up with a spinal cord injury. They're air vac down to the spine unit of VGH, and the family shows up and they're shell-shocked.
Yeah.
Their healthy, active, wonderful son is sitting in the spine unit at VGH with maybe little or no movement or sensation below the neck. And that's a huge shock for everybody, especially the family. And you can't not recognize that. It's the whole family that's in crisis.
Yeah.
And we spend a lot of time in cases like that to help the family adjust to and deal with the fact that their whole world has been turned upside down. The other thing I pride myself on, and I've tried to teach the lawyers in my firm, is the ability to listen to people. You know, the reality is I don't learn anything by talking.
Right.
I learn lots by listening and by watching.
Yeah.
And we never have to lose track of that. My father was a doctor, and he would come home and tell me and my 7 brothers and sisters sitting around a table, lots of snotty noses, don't ever think you're too smart and you know everything. You've got to listen and watch.
Yeah.
And that was after seeing something bad that happened at the hospital because the medical people, the nurses and the doctors didn't listen and watch. So that's been drummed into me since I was about 5 years old.
Well, every time that you and I talk, I'm of a certain age when I remember things perhaps were more relaxed or were things you just didn't pay attention to. We're not being critical of that. But in our last discussion, and we're going to lead into another section of this, we talked about things like preparation for school trips and liability for, and you brought up the one example, we were talking about spine injuries a few minutes ago, about, you know, a group of kids going on a whitewater rafting adventure, and it's the child breaks her neck, and it doesn't happen during the most scary part of that trip. It's not the rapids, it's jumping into a pond. So it's every time we chat, and we're going to get into the holidays in a few minutes, but it's amazing how, not for better or worse, but that you have to be more prepared nowadays in terms of that. This is not a discussion, is it, 40 years ago when you're first coming out of law school?
I recall being in school, and the only school trip we had was, I grew up in Calgary, was to the auditorium to listen to the Calgary Philharmonic. And I remember the most exciting part of the day was the bus ride because the Philharmonic wasn't. We didn't have school outings. We didn't have camping trips. We didn't have ski trips. We didn't have any of that. So that really makes me understand when I get a case in from a school trip is, what was the purpose of the trip? Mm-hmm. You know, if I send a child to school, I expect them to be educated. So when the school decides, let's go on a trip, it's got to be for a real educational purpose. Yeah. It's great that kids have fun. It's great that there's bonding between them and the other classmates. You know, these experiences are great, but there's an educational background that it has to be assessed by. And I know from doing these cases, when you get near water, the danger goes way up.
Yeah.
When you get into any kind of difficult activity, it's just fundamental. You make sure the kids can safely do it. You don't have a gym teacher who sets up a gymnastic equipment in the gym and says to the kid, here, go and do it. Yeah. They train them and they monitor them and they make sure they can do it, and they have mats there in case they fall.
And it's also, and you mentioned the point too about, and we'll get into our today's discussion, but I think it's worth repeating that you also have a group of children, of students, where everybody's not at the same level.
Oh, exactly.
So if it's that hike that you mentioned last time we spoke to Whistler for the day. Sounds like a great outdoor adventure day activity. You get the kids outside to fresh air, but you really have to do your homework as a parent, but also from the school standpoint as well.
Well, if a parent takes their children out to something, they're going to make sure that each of the kids can safely do something. So if I'm a parent and I take 3 or 4 of my kids, ages very little to bigger,
Yeah.
to ski, I might say, okay, the little one or the 2 little ones, they're going to go into ski school. And the other one's going to go into some camp, and the oldest one's a good skier, so they can ski with me.
Yeah.
It's not one size fits all. And when you have a class of students of varying abilities and experience, you got to make sure that each of them can do it safely before you take all of them to do whatever the activity is.
Which leads us into our discussion for part of today, and that is why Murphy Batista is an important firm, but also the practice is important as we enter. We're getting close to the holidays. We're into it. Let's talk about why it's so important now to be prepared if you're having a party, events. We're going to get more into that in our next segment. But talk about why your practice is so important over the holidays.
Bad things happen when people are out doing things they don't normally do. So if I drive back and forth to work, not much is likely going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But when I start doing something different that I don't usually do, skiing is an example. I used to ski a lot. I don't ski much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So when I do something like that, the risk of something happening to me is worse. Any kind of recreational activity has an element of risk, and the key is you want to understand what the risk is so you can manage that risk. Nothing's perfectly safe. There's
Certainly.
always cases where people are careful and bad things happen. Years ago, Jim, I had a client who worked in a construction crew in northern Alberta, and he and the guys in the construction crew would go out and work all day long. They'd go back to the bunkhouse, they'd all shower, and they'd eat.
Yeah.
And they would then drive to the local pub, and they'd all get drunk. And they would drive home drunk and get up the next day, and the process starts again. They go to work. One night, he decided he was going to be careful and reasonable and leave his truck at home. And he did, but while walking back to the camp, one of his drunk buddies ran over him. And I remember him saying to me, Joe, the biggest mistake I made was leaving my truck at home.
Doing the
day.
right.
Yeah. So, there are
thing.
risks out there. You can't protect against all of them, but you just want to try and manage it so that you enjoy doing various things, but that you're not exposed to an unusual and hidden and big danger.
We're talking with Joe Murphy, QC. He's partner at Murphy Batista. This is The Law Show. If you would like more information or if you would like to reach out to them, you can call 1-800 number, which is 1-800-683-9621, also murphybatista.com. And as we mentioned earlier, their offices are all in BC. Head office in Vancouver, but you can find offices in Surrey and Kelowna and Vernon. Once again, that number is 1-800-683-9621 or murphybatista.com. Okay, more discussions about the holidays, parties, all that. What is host liability? Joe will tell us all about that when we return to The Law Show on BNN Bloomberg 1410.
You're on BNN Bloomberg 1410, and we're back with The Law Show with Jim Gordon.
It is The Law Show. We're back here. Joe Murphy, QC, is a partner in Murphy Batista. We're talking about, stuff that is extremely relevant at this time of the year, any time of the year, but certainly around this time of the year when people are hosting Christmas and or holiday parties, either at the office or at home. Joe, let's start with the phrase host liability. Tell our listeners what that is.
Jim, host liability, really simple. It means that the host of a party, and that can be a company or a person, may be liable if someone gets drunk at the party and either they get hurt or someone else gets hurt. And a common scenario is someone is in a pub, they're overserved, they get absolutely drunk, and they're driving home and they run into some poor innocent guy and he or she gets smoked. The claim is against the pub for overserving this person. And those claims are usually successful if you can show that the person was overserved. When someone's badly hurt and they're taken to the hospital immediately draws blood and does tests.
Sure.
And those tests include showing the blood alcohol in the system. So you get a pretty good indication of how much they had to drink. And if you look back at someone who's, let's say, the blood alcohol .05, the province says you shouldn't drive. .08, the federal government says you shouldn't drive. I've had cases involving blood alcohol 2.4, 2.5, 2.6.
Wow.
You and I would probably be unconscious if we were able to drink that much. But
would be
some
walking.
some people are still walking. So the argument against the pub simply is this: you're a pub. You're supposed to be what's called serving it right, which is the province says, here's what you've got to do to make sure you don't overserve. Instead, you overserved, and it created this huge danger, and the danger resulted in this terrible injury to our client, the innocent person driving home who gets smoked by the drunk driver.
Taking the pub example a little further, is it a high percentage? I mean, does the pub have a defense? Could it? I mean, I remember years ago about I can't remember what singer it was, where he was asked to leave, and he seemed okay, but by the time he got in his car, the alcohol had really started to take effect. And the argument was that, well, he was probably okay when he left, but it became worse. I don't know. Does that argument work? Or
well, there was a case back in the early 90s, Jim, and it was a kid who worked for Nike.
Mm-hmm.
And they were setting up a booth in BC Place for some event. And it was a real last-minute rush to get everything done. So they got it all done. And whoever was in charge of the crew got a couple of cases of beer because he was so grateful that these guys were able to get the job done.
Sure.
So this young guy has 2 or 3 or 4 beer. He leaves. He then goes to somewhere else and has more beer, and then is involved in a terrible accident.
Mm-hmm.
And he's badly hurt because he's drunk. So he sues Nike and says, you are liable because you provided the alcohol, and that was the beginning of this terrible thing that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And the judge in that case had to deal with the fact that he did go out and he had more to drink.
Away from where the drinks
after
are offered,
having the Nike beers, he goes to another place, drinks more, and then later's badly hurt. And she held that Nike was primarily responsible because they got that ball rolling, and that without those first 2 or 3 or 4 beer, this evening wouldn't have unwound the way it did.
Not to get too into the weeds with that, but does it really come down to, okay, this man had 2 beers with Nike at that party or whatever company, and then he goes in on his own, says he's leaving, goes to have but he has 3 or 4. Is it really come down to the mathematics in terms of that?
No, it's the influence it's going to have on someone. And there is no magic line. You say, okay, you can serve them this much. The other thing that's interesting, Jim, is there have been cases in which the party host, including a pub, said, okay, we're going to send you home. Someone who's very drunk, the pub arranges to get them safely home, but they're so drunk they go out and something bad happens.
Right.
And the laws rule the pub's still responsible. Their liability or responsibility doesn't end when you get this person safely home. And that's why the government says there's this Serving It Right program, which is there, and it's supposed to monitor how much someone is having in a pub, and it's supposed to recognize that at some point you've got to say to them, listen, you've had enough.
Yeah.
But pubs make money by selling a lot of liquor.
Yeah.
And generally they do. I had a case a few years ago against a pub that had a Super Bowl party, and the ticket to the Super Bowl party included 4 drinks.
Which, okay,
so,
it's a lot for some, but not a lot for others.
Yeah, the problem is that they sold an additional, something like 1,000 additional drinks.
Okay.
And there were some people that didn't even have their 4, and there were other people that had an incredible amount of alcohol.
Right.
And what was my client was a fellow at the Super Bowl party. He's out in the parking lot after this fight erupts between these 2 groups in the pub, and everyone's cleared out.
Yeah.
And he gets sucker punched. So he's not drunk. He's not doing anything but waiting for his ride home.
Sure.
And he gets sucker punched, and he had a devastating brain injury. But that was a case that was interesting because the 9/11 call that went in by the young girl at the reception said to the police, and there was a recording of it, they keep it. She said, oh, there's a bunch of old men here, and they're all drunk. Please come. And the reality is, when you looked at the numbers, and they had an electronic system to gauge the drinks, there was I think it averaged 13 drinks per person. and there were some who didn't have a lot. So,
way through that too, almost, right? I mean, you've got the scrum.
Well, you have the party, you have the people in a small pub, a small intimate pub. You have people cheering for different teams.
Yeah.
And the fight between the two groups started because one of the people in one of the groups was hitting on one of the waitresses and sort of groping her, and a guy from the other group came and said, "Leave her alone."
Mm-hmm.
And that's what started this sort of scuffle in the pub that prompted the pub to say, "Everybody outside."
Yeah.
And my client at the time when that happened was in the washroom. He comes back from the washroom. Everyone's outside, and he thinks, well, I got to meet up with my buddies for my ride home.
Yeah.
And as I say, he had a devastating brain injury.
Wow.
So bad things can happen when people get overserved.
Mm-hmm.
And pubs are supposed to serve it right, but sometimes they serve people way too much.
I'm sure everyone can attest. I see it all the time. Not every day, but it's certainly something that pubs, it's almost like a last thing they want to do because it can also lead to fights. I mean, but you have to protect yourself.
Yeah, it's, you invite people to come in and drink, but the law says they've got to be careful at not over-serving them. And people make money by selling lots of drinks. They don't make money by cutting people off.
We are talking with Joe Murphy. He's partner at Murphy Batista. You want more information? They are BC. You can check out the head office in Vancouver with offices in Surrey, Kelowna, Vernon. More information, you can call 1-800-683-9621 or murphybatista.com. Joe, we go from pubs, restaurants. Let's talk again. We mentioned in our last segment we were getting into the holiday season. Can you talk a bit more about what companies have to worry about, what they incur? I mean, I have worked in this building for almost 20 years. I don't think I've been to a party in many years, even back in the late 90s, early 2000s. The parties, not just here, but other companies I would work with, were starting to disappear. Talk a bit about what companies have to concern themselves with in this day and age, or if you're hosting a personal party, be it Christmas or some other holiday party during the next month.
Well, I'll tell you what we do at our firm party, because we have a big Christmas party. We have all the staff at the Christmas party. We keep an eye on how much people are having to drink. We provide cabs home, regardless of where a person's going. If they're going to Maple Ridge, they get a cab. And we try and be careful. We don't want to not have a party because it's a big event for the staff. We don't want to have a party that's dry because that's not as much fun.
No.
So we take care to try and avoid or minimize risk. And we also have insurance. And Jim, the example I give is I could be afraid that if I take my car out, that I have an accident. And if I was really frightened about that, I could say, I'm not going to drive. I'm going to hide under my bed so nothing bad will happen. But that's not the way we live.
Sure.
So we have parties, we have events, and we're careful and aware of things that can go bad. And the backdrop is we have insurance. So if something does go bad, we have insurance that covers it. In the same way I have insurance on my car. So if I have an accident on the way home because I'm not paying attention or whatever, my insurance takes care of that. I don't stay home and hide under my bed.
Yeah, one of the most common things I've seen over the last decade, more and more each year, is companies also taking the cost on of we're just going to provide cabs for everybody.
Yep.
That's just a good investment.
Yep, it is.
Yeah.
The challenge in Christmas party season is getting cabs.
Yeah. in this town, absolutely. Yeah.
You also asked me about people hosting private parties.
Yes, let's talk about that as well.
There was a case that went many years ago to the Supreme Court of Canada, and it dealt with the liability of what's called a social host, as opposed to a pub or a restaurant. And what the Chief Justice said is it's very unlikely that a social host would be responsible for something that happened, but she didn't foreclose the fact that maybe there'll be facts that will make the social host liable. So it's not that they can never be liable or responsible. It's that there has to be more than simply hosting a party to make you liable if something bad happens either to someone at the party or is caused by that person who leaves the party after drinking too much.
Do you see a lot of that over the last few years compared to 15 years ago? I mean, amongst, say, friends going to personal parties, Steve's having a party, we're going over to his house. Have you seen more of that in your your experience? No?
No, people are more aware now of the need to not drink too much and drive.
Mm-hmm.
The roadblocks at Christmas are catching far fewer people.
That's good, yeah.
Who have had too much to drink and drive. So people are aware of that, and they're either because they know it's not a good idea or because they know if they get caught, especially the provincial law that sets the limit at 0.05. If you're stopped and you have 0.05, they seize your car for a month and they suspend your driver's license for 3 months. And there's almost no way to avoid that happening.
Right.
And 0.05 for most people would be 2.5 drinks.
Yeah.
Consumed fairly quickly.
Good stuff. I've got some more questions about the parties we want to talk to you about in our next segment as we continue this discussion during the holiday season about liability and host liability, what's all involved. We're also going to talk about marijuana legalization, some of the points on that. All that coming up in our next couple segments. We've got a lot of things to talk about. Don't forget, if you want more information from Joe and his company, Murphy and Batista, offices in Vancouver, Surrey, Kelowna, and Vernon, 1-800-683-9621. That's 1-800-683-9621 or online at murphybatista.com. It's the Law Show. We got more coming, as I mentioned, right here on BNN Bloomberg 1410.
Time now for more of The Law Show with Jim Gordon on BNN Bloomberg 1410.
That's right. It's The Law Show. We're here with Joe Murphy, partner of Murphy and Batista, who has a QC after his name. Joe, you told me all about this last time we talked. For listeners out there that may not know what QC stands for, can you explain that before we continue with our discussion?
Jim, it stands for Queen's Counsel because the British royalty now is the Queen.
Right.
Before she was the Queen, it was her father, the King, and it was then called a KC. But she's been the Queen forever. So
60 years, yeah. Yeah, 52.
Yeah, it's given out by the province and the federal government every year. And it's a sign of excellence in being a lawyer.
Very nice.
And I got it for doing a whole bunch of cases that ended up with very, very good results for my clients.
Well done. Well deserved then. We're with Joe, and last segment, if you're just joining us, we were talking about host liability. The holiday season is here. Parties come up all the time. What do you incur? What are you liable for if you're hosting a business party or a personal party? And I wanted to get to this question. You talked about protecting yourself at home, Joe. But what happens? Does host insurance help if someone slips and falls, or leaving your party stone cold sober, or arriving at your party and they, for example, might slip in the driveway or fall? How does that work?
Well, Jim, I have a homeowner policy like everyone out there. Some people have renters policies. It's probably the best insurance policy I have because it covers everything other than me operating a motor vehicle or me working.
Right.
So if I'm on the ski slopes and I don't watch where I'm going and I run over another skier, my homeowner policy provides me coverage if that other skier sues me.
Okay.
If someone comes onto my property and slips and falls, but it doesn't have to be on my property. It's sort of anywhere in the world. The homeowner policy provides the coverage. So I always say to people when they ask is get the maximum amount of liability with your homeowner policy because it's just so useful and so inexpensive.
Well, here's another example. Good question. Because I was at a party the other night, and it went from the house or condo. Somebody said, "Let's go out," and it was a walk. When the party is taken elsewhere, moves to a bar or club after a company event or a personal event, what's the situation then?
Yeah, Jim, if someone has too much to drink somewhere, and let's take a pub, it'll take hours for that alcohol to leave their system. And as long as the alcohol's in the system, there's a potential liability on the party that served them that alcohol to be responsible for bad things that might happen either to the person who had the alcohol, but more likely to someone else. And, the innocent person driving home that gets smoked by the drunk. That's sort of the standard scenario.
Going back to you're having a party, we're all at your house. And so, as I said, we go out. But so let's say you don't go with us. You've had enough. You want to stay in and clean the whole thing. We all go out, but something happens then. So are you still? You mentioned the pub
I'm
one,
still
pub two.
potentially liable, but the courts have never found a host in Canada of a house party liable
Right.
for someone who gets drunk and then something bad happens. It's possible they would be liable, but it's not something that's happened yet. So I would think if I have a party and I live in a remote area and I have someone who comes in and it's bring your own bottle and they finish the bottle and I say, here, I want you to try some of this.
Right.
And here, have this, knowing that they're going to be driving home. Then I think I would be liable. If, and you get some people, and it's less common now than it was 10 or 20 years ago, that are really encouraging people, no, you've got to have another drink.
Yeah, of course.
Let's do the shooters, that kind of thing. I think there would be liability then. But so far, there's not been a case I'm aware of in Canada where the host of a house party is found to be liable.
And what if what was the case a couple of years ago? I think it was in Squamish, where the one gentleman was holding a party, went over to tell another party to be quiet, and ended in, I think, the man's death. That's an extreme example. But if you say, what happens if you go over, you're having a quiet evening in, and you go over to tell another party next door to keep the noise down?
Well, that was in Squamish, and that was a doctor and his wife who went away, leaving their teenage kids in charge of their house, asking the neighbor, a young lawyer who had a family and kids, to keep an eye on the house. And one of the doctor's kids has a New Year's party. It gets out of line. The lawyer goes over to say, hey, shut it down. It's time to shut it down. And he gets sucker punched and he dies. So terrible, terrible tragedy.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was a civil case that came out of that. There was criminal charges. And in the end, I think the person who sucker punched him was found guilty of manslaughter, pled guilty to manslaughter. But in those cases, the courts have found that if the parents aren't careful in leaving the house with someone responsible, and some wild party happens and something bad happens, the parents may be responsible for failing to take reasonable steps to make sure the house was safe.
I just want to circle back on what we talked about last segment for people that may be joining us again or right now. Let's talk again about just your checklist. If you, Joe, like you talked about having your firm always has a holiday Christmas party, everything. Can we just go over just a simplistic checklist of what companies should be aware of before holding a party? Just again, protection, liability.
Well, we're concerned with everyone having a good time, but we also are on the lookout for people who've had too much to drink. With people who have had too much to drink, we want to make sure they get safely home.
Right.
For others, we provide cab fares or cab chits so that they can get home. But as I said earlier, if you're responsible for someone who's drunk and you get them home, that doesn't mean your responsibility ends because the alcohol's still in their system. And you can get people. I had a friend who was in the RCMP, and he stopped a fellow one morning about 7 a.m. The guy was on the way to work, and he ended up giving him a breathalyzer, and he was still 0.17.
Wow.
So he must have been so high. On average, you lose 0.015 blood alcohol per hour.
Yeah.
So 2 hours, you should have lost 0.03. 4 hours, you should have lost 0.06. So when you're still at a high level, hours later,
wow,
you know how much alcohol these people had in their system earlier.
Can you give me an answer on this? I'm not sure. When is for lack of a better phrase, when does the responsibility end, though, or something like that?
I think when the alcohol in their system diminishes to such a point that it's not a major factor.
If that example you just cited, would the pub or bar or restaurant, whatever, the night before,
I think so.
If he's there till midnight, goes home, falls asleep for 3 hours.
Well, you can imagine how much he had to drink. And sometimes we have a case where we have to piece together how much someone had to drink. And if people are paying cash for their drinks, the standard pub setting, that can be difficult. But if you've got someone involved in a bad accident, the hospital did the blood work, and the blood work tells you what it was then.
Yeah.
And you then work backwards, and you can estimate what it was at the time of the accident. And if they did all the drinking in one pub, the fingers all point to that pub as having overserved them.
And do you find in your experience, too, we were talking earlier about pubs and their liability, do you find that they're taking this as seriously as it needs to be taken?
I think pubs have to balance between making money, selling lots of drinks, and making money, and people having a good time, and at the same time, the Serving It Right program that the province mandates. It's difficult because you make money by having people stay and drink. Mm-hmm. You don't make money when you sell someone a Coke.
Right,
nor will they stay and have more Cokes. But when you get people drinking beer, especially, it sort of snowballs. And the more they drink, the less judgment they have that it's time to go home. And I had a friend years ago, and he was someone who drank a lot. And what was interesting about him is if you got him in the middle of an evening and said, "Give me your keys, you're drinking a lot," he'd say, "Okay." But if you wait beyond that point and he's had more to drink, he's not going to give you his keys.
Which is probably a lot to do with when people have parties where, the best parties I've ever been to is when at least one of the hosts is drinking water or non-alcoholic drinks all night, because then their judgment cannot be impaired by, "Joe, I think you've had too much. I'm stone cold sober. You can't drive home." I've noticed that. And that I've also seen that run very well at office parties during the holiday season, where you've got people serving that aren't drinking as well, as opposed to just that open bar. Everything's there, people just helping themselves.
Well, there was a case recently, Jim, this is a BC case, where the designated driver, who hadn't had anything to drink, is driving some drunks home.
Right.
The fellow in the front seat is so crazy and drunk, he grabs the steering wheel.
Oh, my.
There's an accident. The drunk who grabbed the steering wheel, is killed, but the driver is very badly injured. And the issue was, well, is there any ICBC coverage here?
And?
The trial court found not really. There's minimum $200,000 coverage, but this is devastating injury.
Right.
And it was a court of appeal that said, listen, we have a system set up to provide universal comprehensive insurance, and we have a society that wants to encourage people to be the designated drivers.
Yeah.
So the last thing we want to do in a situation like this is leave them out in the cold. And the court of appeal said, no, there is coverage for this.
Excellent. Okay. We're talking with Joe Murphy, QC, and partner of Murphy and Batista. More information and send your inquiries to their website, murphybatista.com. Offices, by the way, head office in Vancouver, offices in Surrey, Kelowna, and Vernon. We've got one more segment coming up on this Law Show. You're listening to it on BNN Bloomberg 1410.
You're listening to The Law Show with Jim Gordon on BNN Bloomberg 1410.
It is The Law Show. We're back with Joe Murphy, partner at Murphy and Batista. If you'd like more information or you've got some inquiries, why not send them to murphybatista.com. They also have offices in Vancouver, Surrey, Kelowna, and Vernon. Joe, our last segment, we're going to talk about something that's, of course, been all over the news across this country over the last month or so, and it's marijuana legalization. How does this affect companies and employees?
Jim, my main answer to that is I don't know.
I don't think you're alone.
This is so new and so unusual. And the government brought it in quite quickly in terms of introducing it. But how it's going to work in a setting where you have certain accommodations that have been made historically for smokers. The airports have little smoking lounges. Sure. And outside our office building in downtown Vancouver, we have staff that has to wander away a distance, 10 meters, whatever. They usually try and find a covered area and smoke. But marijuana, so you've got the actual smoking is one issue. Mm-hmm. And some people don't like the smell of marijuana burning.
I'm one of them.
Some people, I could see a smoker in a smoking room saying to someone smoking some dope, you shouldn't be here because you bother me. This bothers me.
Yeah.
Then there's the effect of the marijuana. If I'm putting on my office Christmas party, which we are, and I get someone, I can watch how much they have to drink, but I don't know if in addition to that, they are either smoking or consuming marijuana. And I don't know if there's any way that I could know that.
Right.
So it's really the unknown. It's a matter of us over time trying to figure out how we as a business and we as a society are going to work this reality into our life. I as I say, I started out saying I don't know.
But it always strikes me with these type of stories that and events and laws that sometimes you're playing catch up, the government, and so if you're a company, like for example, you alluded to it, Christmas party, and someone wants to smoke outside a company party. I don't know enough about it to know how that does affect and not affect. If it's, you're having a drink, you said a couple glasses of wine or something, you're outside doing that. Are companies, for a party, you've got a smoking area, but you said, I was a long-time smoker. If I were having a cigarette outside a party and someone came and smoked a joint or something beside me, that would annoy me. As much as my smoking would annoy a non-smoker.
Well, we have Christmas party. We don't have a smoking area outside. They've got to wander out of the restaurant and find somewhere away from enough doors or distance from some doors. But the challenge I see is I can watch someone having a lot to drink and have a general sense of whether they're getting drunk. Mm-hmm. But if that person is a smoker and they always go out every 45 minutes or hour and a half, if they go out and instead of having a cigarette, toke up, that makes it so much more difficult for me to think, okay, they've had enough or they've had too much. It's just added another layer of uncertainty onto the whole process of trying to manage people who are drinking at a party.
I have a couple friends that no longer drink. They enjoy toking up. And you're right. I mean, how is this, again, because everybody's playing catch up, how is this going to affect laws on impaired driving?
Well, the problem the police have in proving impairment is trying to measure what that impairment is. We have ways, either with a breathalyzer or in a hospital with lab tests, of showing what the alcohol content is in a person, but the ability to measure the THC level in a person, I think it's still so elementary we don't know. Yeah. How does a policeman on the street stop a person and decide how much, if they have THC, how much, and how much is too much? I mean, the law really hasn't established that yet, I don't think.
Can you see a cop stopping somebody and just using the standard test outside your car, the walk, touch your, all that stuff? Is that, I don't know enough about it to know. As you said, will we get to a point, the evolution, where a test will be able to determine very specifically, like you get with alcohol?
I assume so, but I don't know. When you were telling that story, I remember seeing a clip of a police officer who had a car cam or body cam on, and he gets this guy out behind his car, and he says to him, "Say the alphabet backwards," and the guy does perfectly.
I don't think I could do that.
And the policeman said, "That's amazing," and the guy says, "Yeah, and I'm drunk." So it was. It was interesting, but alphabet backwards, I can count by 7 backwards. Yeah. But I can't do the alphabet backwards.
I barely do the alphabet forward, actually, and sober. And so is this, I find this area fascinating of our discussion, because I'm like everybody else playing catch up with everything like that. This came in very quickly, as you mentioned. And is this something else that, as you said earlier, that this is going to be another thing that company parties and people hosting parties are going to have to worry about?
It is, and I don't know how you manage it, because you have people who can be smoking, they can be eating. You can take tablets, I think, that have THC in them. Having said that, though, there are some people, I have friends who, for insomnia, have found that only marijuana helps. Only marijuana helps them sleep properly every night. Yeah. And there's a variety of people that find that the marijuana is the best thing they can find for pain, for chronic pain, and a variety of other ailments. Yeah. So there's lots of real benefits out there, but how we're going to manage the impairment caused by THC into our system of trying to figure out who's safe to drive, for instance, and who isn't, I don't know. Over time, we'll figure it out, but right now, I just don't know.
You made that reference about the counting backwards, the alphabet. I mean, are the police up to date on this? Are they playing catch up as well on how to, as you said, stop people, ride programs? I mean, do they know what to look for the way they would, say, with alcohol?
I assume they're being trained to do that, but it's still early on, and it's a learning curve for everybody.
Wow. We'll see as things move on. Joe, I'd like to circle back on your company. You're a partner at Murphy Batista. You have been around for quite some time. Can you talk about just the evolution of your company since 1982, your philosophy for people that may have missed our discussion earlier in the show?
Well, Jim, we set up January of 1982. It was Joe Batista and I and 2 secretaries. Interest rates were 19%. Businesses were closing everywhere. The fact that we were opening was very, very, very unusual.
Uh-huh.
We never advertised in then the Yellow Pages. That's where everybody, the lawyers, advertised. We've never advertised on TV. We have adopted a philosophy: if we do a really good job for our clients, the business will come, and it has. We now have 25 lawyers. We have a support staff of about 75. We have offices, Vancouver, Surrey, Kelowna, and Vernon. And again, we have this old-fashioned idea: if we do a really good job for our clients, the work will come. 1 in 10 of our cases goes to trial, which is a very, very high rate. But all the clients benefit when we get a good judgment, because that means their cases with ICBC usually are settled for a better number than if we didn't have the reputation of getting good results at trial. We also do medical malpractice work. We do dental malpractice claims. We do slip and fall claims, and people can be devastated. Someone falling down a set of stairs usually ends up with a spinal cord injury and or a brain injury. There's school accidents. There's recreational accidents. There's all these ways that people get badly hurt.
And you also talked in our last show about your company certainly stays through the long haul.
A
couple of cases.
I did one case that was 18 years from start to finish. I was hired shortly after an accident where a 2-year-old girl was badly injured in a car, and we finished the case 18 years later when she was 20. And it was only then that I could really understand the long-term impact of the brain injury that she had from this accident 18 years earlier.
You mentioned, and we've mentioned it throughout the show, offices in Vancouver, Surrey, Kelowna, Vernon. I really think, and I want to say this because I think it's really important to mention this again, that you see legal commercials all the time for law firms on television. And just because you're seeing it in Vancouver or somewhere else in the Lower Mainland or in BC, that doesn't mean the firms are here. You are. Can you just talk a little bit about that before we wrap things up? That you see these commercials with the kindly old man with the white hair, and he seems very fatherly and protective, but the firm could be in Toronto and satelliting out here, and that may not assist you with getting the proper care.
The 2 firms that are new to BC in the last few years are Presler Law and Diamond & Diamond. They are from Ontario. They have a relatively small presence in BC. They do a lot of TV advertising.
Yeah, they do.
And I say to people, would you choose a neurosurgeon from a TV ad? And the answer is, well, of course not. I would say to my doctor, who's good?
Yeah.
Who should I see? The TV ads are effective because people do connect with these firms.
Certainly.
But my firm has a very different philosophy. We've never, as I say, we weren't in the Yellow Pages when there was 60, 80, 100 pages of lawyers' ads.
Yeah.
And we've never advertised on TV. We've taken a different approach. And over time, the firm has grown substantially because the work did come in.
Yeah, I can see both sides of that discussion about doing it on television or not. I think I'd lead toward not. I don't know. I'd rather look at somebody's track record and get advice or something. I mean, do you have a lot of referrals?
Well, almost all our work is referred in. People are told contact these people. We have a website, and we have a lot of positive Google reviews by clients, former clients, and that's a source of comfort for people who do the research, and websites are becoming more and more common in terms of where people look. And they call us, but it's referred in. People who are told sometimes talk to 2 or 3 firms, sometimes just come and see us, and we endeavor to do a very good job for them.
Very nice.
And we've succeeded, as I say, at building a very big practice. Our philosophy was never to grow. I didn't want to have a big firm.
Right.
But over time, with the volume of work coming in, we needed to grow to service our clients. So that was the reason why we've gone from 2 lawyers to 25 and from 1 little office to a very large office in Vancouver. We have a whole floor of one of the towers downtown and offices in Surrey, Kelowna, and Vernon. It's what we needed to do to take care of our clients.
It must be tough too, or a challenge at the very least, to not want to grow bigger, because I would imagine it's a lot easier to maybe oversee everything, because I think that's what can sometimes, for example, kill restaurants. When an owner opens one, it's successful, and he opens up 5, but he can't be everywhere. You got to really believe in your people, do you not?
You do, and what's interesting, Jim, is big law firms take a successful lawyer in the firm and they make him or her into the managing partner.
Right.
And that's always amazed me that you've taken someone who's really good at something and you're giving them a job they may not be any good at.
Right. Yeah.
So in our firm, we have an IT manager who's an IT specialist. She has her degree in honors computer science.
Right.
We have an HR manager. We have an administrative manager, and we have other people that sort of work under them. So lawyers don't run the firm. It's run by people who are really good at what they do. And my time is not usefully spent trying to run a business. I'm involved.
Certainly.
But my philosophy is find really good people, bring them in, treat them very well, and they'll do a great job.
Very nice, Joe. Well, listen, if you've got some inquiries, some questions, you can always send them through the website, murphybatista.com. We've talked today about host liability, parties over the holiday season, the Christmas season, how to prepare yourself and cover yourself. Again, if you've got questions on some of the things we've talked about today, you can send them to murphybatista.com. Joe has offices, the firm does, in Vancouver, their head office, Surrey, Kelowna, and Vernon. Joe, thank you as always. Always insightful, always educational. We look forward to talking with you again.
You're very welcome, Jim.
We're talking with Joe Murphy, partner at Murphy Batista, and this has been The Law Show. I'm Jim Gordon. You've been listening to it on BNN Bloomberg 1410.
Thank you for listening to The Law Show on BNN Bloomberg 1410, featuring Murphy Batista, LLP, Vancouver personal injury lawyers. If you'd like more information on today's topics, contact the team at murphybatista.com.
It's always best to understand your rights before dealing with any insurance company. If you or someone you know is being seriously injured, the team at Murphy Batista, LLP can help. Book your free consultation at murphybatista.com.